fight on the beaches and fight them.
In the summer of 1940, every serious military mind in the world agreed on one thing. Britain was finished. France had fallen in 6 weeks. The most powerful army in Europe had been swept aside like it was nothing. And now the full force of Nazi Germany, the most fearsome war machine the world had ever seen, was pointed directly at us. Across 22 miles of water, the Americans thought we would surrender within weeks. The Germans were already printing occupation currency. Hitler was so certain of victory, that he offered us peace terms. Generous ones. We could keep our entire empire, every colony, every territory, every outpost from Canada to India to Australia, all of it. In return for one thing, we simply had to let Hitler have Europe. And Britain, this small, rain-soaked island on the edge of the Atlantic, with its threadbare army and its volunteer home guard and its borrowed destroyers, said no. What happened next is the reason the world you are sitting in right now exists. There is a moment in this story, a single afternoon in September 1940, when Winston Churchill sat in a room and asked a question. And the answer to that question should have ended Britain. Should have ended everything. What happened in that room and why it didn't end is coming. And there is a secret at the heart of this story. A secret kept for 30 years after the war ended. A secret that, when it was finally revealed, changed how historians understood everything that had happened. That secret is coming. Let me tell you what Britain actually looked like in June 1940. Because the mythology sometimes obscures the reality. And the reality is far more extraordinary than the myth. Our army had survived Dunkirk evacuation, yes, over 300,000 men brought home across the Channel in fishing boats and pleasure steamers and warships. One of the most remarkable evacuations in military history. But they came home without their equipment. Their tanks, gone. Their artillery, gone. Their transport, gone. We had 25 divisions armed mainly with rifles. 25 divisions of men with rifles, standing between these islands and the armored columns of Nazi Germany. Signposts were removed from roads across southern England, so that when the Germans arrived, they wouldn't be able to find their way around. Think about that. The British government was removing road signs because they genuinely believed the Germans might be driving through Kent within weeks. A volunteer defense force, the Home Guard, was recruited. Men too old or too young or too unfit for regular service. 1.5 million of them signed up within weeks. Barely enough weapons to go around. My grandfather was one of them. Standing on a hillside in Surrey with a pike, an actual pike, because there were no rifles left. And yet, nobody was suggesting surrender. George VI wrote in his diary, and I think this is one of the most extraordinary sentences written by any British person in the 20th century. Personally, I feel happier now that we have no more allies to be polite to and to pamper. Happier. Alone against Hitler. Happier. That is Britain. That has always been Britain. Churchill put it differently. This moment, he said, this terrifying, isolated, apparently hopeless moment, would be our finest hour. He was right. But I want to stop here for a moment, because there is something about Winston Churchill that the comfortable mythology tends to soften. Churchill was not simply a bulldog with a cigar and a good speech. He was ruthless. Genuinely, deliberately, strategically ruthless. And that ruthlessness, as much as the speeches, is what saved us. Here is an example. When France fell, when France surrendered and became in effect a German puppet state, a powerful French naval squadron was sitting in the port of Merzelkabir in French North Africa. 2 battleships, 2 battlecruisers, modern, powerful. If those ships fell into German hands, the balance of power in the Mediterranean would shift dramatically against us. So Churchill sent a Royal Navy task force and demanded that the French ships either join us or sail to a neutral port to be interned. The French refused, so we opened fire on our former allies. On men who had fought alongside us, who had died alongside us, who were, until 6 weeks earlier, our friends. We destroyed or severely damaged 3 of their battleships. Almost 1,300 French sailors were killed by British guns in a single afternoon. Churchill wept when he announced it to the House of Commons. But he had given the order because he understood, with absolute clarity, that there were no half measures in this war. You were either fighting it completely, ruthlessly, without sentiment, or you were losing it. That decision, the attack on Mers el-Kebir, sent a message to the entire world. Britain was not looking for a way out. Britain was in this to the end. Now, the actual battle. The Battle of Britain, July to October 1940. The most consequential air battle in the history of warfare. And I want you to understand the numbers, because the numbers are the only way to understand how extraordinary what happened actually was. The Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, had over 2,600 aircraft, fighters, bombers, the finest air force in the world, battle-hardened from 3 years of combat over Spain, Poland, France, and Norway. Their commander, Hermann Goering, was so confident of victory that he told Adolf Hitler he could destroy the Royal Air Force in 4 weeks. Against them, Hugh Dowding had fewer than 700 fighters, less than 700. The average age of an RAF fighter pilot in the summer of 1940 was 20 years old. 20. Boys. Some of them were sent into combat with as little as 10 hours of flying experience. Pilots who had never fired their guns in anger, who had barely mastered taking off and landing, sent up into the sky against experienced Luftwaffe veterans who had been fighting for years. The average life expectancy of a Spitfire pilot during the Battle of Britain was 4 weeks. 4 weeks. And they kept going up every single day. Sometimes 7 sorties in a single day. Up, fight, land, refuel, up again, fight, refuel, up again. Day after day after day. Now, Dowding was a brilliant man. Quiet, stubborn, unflashy, not at all the sort of figure that gets celebrated in the mythology. But he understood something that Goering did not. He understood that he could not win by fighting the Luftwaffe on its own terms. He could not afford to. He didn't have the numbers. So instead, he played for time. He used his fighters sparingly, only committing to the big attacks, refusing to be drawn into combat over the Channel, where his pilots, if shot down, would be lost at sea. He husbanded his resources, and he built his strategy around something no air force in the world had ever used before, as the core of its defense. Radar. A string of 21 radar masts, 300 feet tall, running along the south and east coasts of Britain. They could detect aircraft at a range of 120 miles. The moment a German formation left the French coast, Dowding knew it was coming. He knew how many aircraft. He knew the direction. He knew the altitude. His controllers could vector fighters to intercept with extraordinary precision. The Germans, astonishingly, failed to understand what radar meant for the battle. They attacked the radar stations on the first day of their main offensive. Then they stopped attacking them. Goering decided radar wasn't important enough to bother with. It was the first of 2 catastrophic mistakes that cost him the battle. The second was worse. September the 15th, 1940. Winston Churchill was visiting RAF Fighter Command Headquarters at Uxbridge. He was watching the battle board, the Mapstrelio, the map showing German formations inbound, RAF squadrons scrambling, the desperate arithmetic of attack and defense. He watched as controller after controller called in reinforcements, squadron after squadron committed to the battle. And then he leaned over to Keith Park, the man commanding 11 Group, and asked a quiet question. What other reserves have we got? Park looked at him. There are none. None. Every single fighter Hugh Dowding had was already in the air. There was nothing left in reserve. If the Germans sent in another wave that afternoon, there would be nothing to stop them. Churchill sat in silence. The most powerful orator in the English-speaking world, silent. The German second wave came and was fought off by exhausted, outnumbered pilots in damaged aircraft, running on nothing but nerve. That evening, September the 17th, Adolf Hitler postponed Operation Sea Lion. The invasion of Britain would not happen. The battle was won. Let me tell you exactly how it was won, because it was not won in a single glorious moment. It was won through a series of German mistakes and British refusals to break. Mistake 1, as I said, was underestimating Radafar. Mistake 2 was far more consequential. By late August 1940, the Luftwaffe was finally doing what it needed to do, attacking the RAF's airfields, systematically, relentlessly. The airfields of southern England were being hammered. Pilots were flying from cratered runways. Operations rooms were being moved into tents. Ground crews were working through the night to patch together damaged aircraft. The RAF was close, genuinely close, to breaking point. Hugh Dowding himself later admitted that another 2 weeks of those airfield attacks might have finished it. And then, on the night of the 24th of August, a German bomber got lost. A single flight of Heinkel bombers, off course in the dark, dropped their bombs on central London, on residential streets, on civilian homes, on the city itself. It was not deliberate. It was a navigational error, but Winston Churchill's response was immediate and calculated. The next night, 81 British bombers raided Berlin, Hitler's capital. The city he had told the German people was untouchable, the city that Hermann Goering had personally promised would never be bombed. Adolf Hitler was furious. He demanded retaliation, massive, immediate, against London. And on September the 7th, Goering switched his bombers from the RAF's airfields to the London docks. More than 450 civilians died that night. Thousands of homes were destroyed. It was a catastrophe for London, but it was a gift to the RAF, because the airfields, battered, barely functioning, almost broken, got 2 weeks to recover. And those 2 weeks were enough. Goering gave us those 2 weeks because a German bomber got lost in the dark. History sometimes turns on the smallest things. Now, the secret I promised you. The secret kept for 30 years. There is a country house in Buckinghamshire, slightly run down, unremarkable from the outside, the sort of place you would drive past without a second glance. It is called Bletchley Park, and what happened inside it during the World War II may have been the single greatest intellectual achievement in British history. Because at Bletchley Park, working in huts on terrible food, in conditions that were frequently chaotic, Britain cracked the German Enigma machine code. The machine the Germans used to encode every single military communication. A machine they were absolutely, completely, unshakably convinced was unbreakable. It had 150 million possible settings. 150 million. And the British cracked it. Not immediately, not easily, not without the crucial groundwork laid by Polish Cipher Bureau, whose contribution history has sometimes been too slow to acknowledge. But it was at Bletchley, under a man named Alastair Denniston, with a team of mathematicians, chess masters, crossword puzzle experts, and, crucially, a Cambridge mathematician named Alan Turing Purcell, that the Enigma code was broken systematically and consistently. Turing's machines, which he called his bronze goddesses, ran through permutations until the key was found. And once it was found, Germany's most secret communications were an open book. Churchill called it his ultra-secret. And the distribution of ultra-intelligence was so tightly controlled, so carefully managed, that for 30 years after the war ended, the public had no idea it had existed. Veterans who had worked at Bletchley took the secret to their graves. Men and women who had arguably done more to win the war than almost anyone else could never tell their families what they had done. Because the secret had to be kept. It was not revealed to the public until 1974. 30 years. That is the measure of British discipline. That is the measure of British loyalty to a cause. 30 years of silence from thousands of people to protect a secret that had already won a war. When Bletchley gave Hugh Dowding a clear picture of the Luftwaffe's order of battle and strategy before the Battle of Britain began, it confirmed that his tactic of committing his fighters sparingly was correct. It didn't win the battle alone, but it gave Britain the confidence to hold its nerve. And in 1940, holding your nerve was everything. I want to end with something personal. I am proud to be British. Not in a chest-thumping, flag-waving, shutting out the world kind of way. In a quieter way, a more considered way. The way you feel proud of something when you actually understand what it cost. In the summer of 1940, Britain had every reason to make a deal. The deal was on the table. It was generous, and it would have been the rational choice. Every military assessment said we couldn't win. Every diplomatic calculation suggested negotiation was the sensible option. And Britain said no. Not because we were reckless, not because we didn't understand the odds, but because we understood. with a clarity that the history books sometimes obscure, what the alternative actually meant. Not just for Britain, for every country Hitler hadn't conquered yet, for every person living under occupation, for the idea, fragile, imperfect, worth fighting for, that free people should get to decide their own futures. 3,000 pilots flew in the Battle of Britain. 544 of them were killed. Their average age was 22. They were not exceptional people in the way that we sometimes make heroes exceptional. They were ordinary young men who happened to find themselves in an extraordinary moment. And they did not flinch. Winston Churchill said it best. He always did. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. But I would add something to that. Those few were not just the pilots. They were the mathematicians in the huts at Bletchley Park, the women at the radar stations on the coast, the Home Guard volunteers with their pikes on the hillsides, the dock workers of London who went back to work the morning after the bombs fell, the BBC engineers broadcasting in 17 languages to keep hope alive in occupied Europe, the special operations executive agents parachuted into France who knew perfectly well they might never come back. Britain at its greatest is not a government. It is not an empire. It is not a flag. It is the thing that happens when ordinary people are asked to do something extraordinary and find, quietly, without ceremony, without fuss, that they can. In the summer of 1940, we found that. And the world is different because we did. In the summer of 1940, every serious military mind in the world agreed on one thing. Britain was finished. They were wrong. They have always been wrong about Britain. If this video moved something in you, if you felt what I felt writing it, share it. Because the story of 1940 is not just history. It is a reminder of what this country is capable of when it decides to be. Subscribe for more stories of British greatness, the battles, the breakthroughs, the quiet heroism that changed the world. Every week,